Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
John C. Inscoe is the Albert B. Say Professor of History and University Professor at the University of Georgia, the Secretary-Treasurer of the Southern Historical Association, and editor of the New Georgia Encyclopedia. Busy man. He has published several works: Mountain Masters, The Heart of Confederate Appalachia, Race, War, and Remembrance in the Appalachian South. But the book we are interested in today is Writing the South Through the Self, Explorations in Southern Autobiography. And I think it may be the wrong way round in your material. In a time when people tend to discount the regional authenticity of the South, Dr. Inscoe has let the Southerners, African, Native, and European Americans, speak for themselves. In the process, they define themselves as being from distinct Southern regions and cultures, and who better to tell about who and what those are? This endeavor relates so well to Lillian Smith's quest to be heard as a Southern woman and human person. As each writer strives to give voice to self and region, we have to acknowledge Dr. Inscoe's contribution to interethnic relationships and their importance in an ever-expanding world. In highlighting the autobiographers establishing their voices and identities, Dr. Inscoe makes an important addition to showing the many faces of an identifiable South. Teaching a course with this volume as textbook, one would move well beyond the duality of W.E.B. Du Bois' dictum of 1903. Through the writings of the present authors, we gain the knowledge to move ahead in the changing South and contemporary America, which is exactly what Lillian Smith wanted us to do. Welcome and congratulations to Dr. John C. Inscoe, one of the year's winners of the Lillian Smith Book Award. I'll hold it for you while you talk.
Well, thank you, Mary. Appreciate that very nice introduction. Well, this is a real honor, and I really want to thank the selection committee for, really, among other things, putting me in the good company of Professor Brown-Nagin and her magisterial study of Atlanta's civil rights movement. I'd just like to say, I'm sure as most of you know, there's no city in the country for whom the civil rights or the race relations have been continually explored by scholars than Atlanta. And to bring something new to that table, and something new on so many fronts, both as far as information, insight, interpretation, new cast of characters, it really is a tremendous achievement. And it's a great read, big read, great read, and it's a real honor to share the stage with her. I also want to thank two people that are here in the audience today, both of who had much to do with my turning into a book. What really started as just a couple of lectures and some workshops I did with teachers around the state there, and they saw something more in that and really pushed me to turn that into that book. One of those is Nancy Grayson, the editor-in-chief of UGA Press. Alas, for only another month or less, she is about to retire and is leaving mighty big shoes to fill, and had much to do with shaping this as a book there. And Jamil Zanaldine, our mighty head of the Georgia Humanities Council, who I hope will never retire, there, who has done so much for this state and so much for the council there. I think I'll just say we are really blessed here in Georgia to have such a first-rate state university press and a humanities council, both of which are so deeply committed to and do so much to support, produce, encourage so much good Georgia history, literature, culture, and it's especially gratifying when the two of them team up on projects as they're doing more and more often, and I'm really grateful to both for the support on my book. They form a powerful partnership, and we're all the better off because of their efforts and ours. And I also should introduce the wonderful new director of UGA Press, Lisa Brayer, who is here in the audience today. A lot of you all should get to know Lisa. She's going to be here for a long time to come. So talk to Lisa and go by UGA Press booth and hear later there. Well, another reason this award means so much to me is that I've thought about and written about Lillian Smith a good bit in recent years, including in this book. In fact, there's no one I quote more often in this book than Lillian Smith. I'm wondering maybe if that's why I got singled out for this award. I kind of wish I'd thought to work in a few quotes from Joseph Pulitzer or Alfred Nobel, maybe. Who knows how that might have paid off. Yeah. But I'll certainly settle for this. This is quite an honor. This book grows out of a course that I have long taught at UGA on Southern autobiography as Southern history. Both the course and the book are based on the premise that autobiographers are, or can be, among the most astute chroniclers of the South. In part because Southerners, I believe, more so than most Americans, are intrinsically linked to place and region and find their identity in both. Lillian Smith certainly epitomizes that linkage more fully than most. Her classic Killers of the Dream, first published in 1949, is hardly a conventional memoir as such. In fact, what makes it so compelling and so teachable, I think, is that she had such a flair for metaphor, for analogy, for parables, for anecdotes, and other forms of literary expression, including references to her own childhood and adolescence, but used all of them to probe the Southern psyche, even as she so heartily condemned the region's institutions and social practices at the time she was writing, to an extent that no other white Southerner, as Charles Johnson made the point, no one else in the mid-50s, certainly no other whites in the mid-century, 40s and 50s, no other white Southerner was willing to do so to the extent that she was. And she did it all with such great insight, passion, emotional fervor, and often anger. And yet there was always a human and humane dimension to her work that I would argue continues to make it so relevant, continues to make it so teachable. But Smith was hardly alone in writing the South through the Self. Always get that. Dozens of writers, black, white, and both. I have a whole chapter devoted to mixed race identity and the struggles that many people writing their memoirs have felt in identifying themselves by one race or another. But together they found that they could make themselves and their identities best understood by setting their experience and feelings within the broader context of place, whether that meant the South as a whole or more often through the particularities of households, of families, of communities. Thus, to read Southerners' life stories is to find ourselves in churches, in courtrooms, in country stores, in classrooms, on playgrounds, in locker rooms, college campuses, in cotton, tobacco fields, on plantation porches, in slave quarters, tenant shacks, mountain cabins, trailer parks, and urban slums. We hear not only an author's own voice, we also hear those of his or her parents, the grandparents, siblings, teachers, professors, employers, co-workers. Both benefactors and oppressors, friends and foes, are brought vividly to life in the most skillfully constructed of these narratives. And through this cacophony of voices and viewpoints, we are exposed to a range of temperaments and perspectives well beyond those of the writer himself. We can learn a great deal about white rationales for slavery or Jim Crow from the viewpoint of black authors who lived under those regimes. Poor whites often come to life through the words and deeds of their socioeconomic betters. And women can tell us an awful lot about men, whether or not they raise them, marry them, exploit them, or support them. There. I'm not sure male writers get women nearly as well. I can think of only a few exceptions where men really do justice to the women in their lives. The other key factor that I think makes these works so accessible, indeed so memorable, is that Southerners tend to privilege storytelling, dramatic turning points, and cathartic and revelatory moments, and pack them with meaning, insight, and feeling, sometimes well beyond anything intended by the authors. As Flannery O'Connor once noted, the Southerner knows he can do more justice to reality by telling a story than he can by discussing problems or proposing abstractions. It's actually his way of reasoning and dealing with experience. And again, no one did so more adeptly or to fuller effect than Lillian Smith, who used her storytelling skills to fuse self with South in such creative and often startling ways. But many others have done so as well. And when I try to use their writings to get at a variety of subtle and not so subtle truths about the region and the society that they claimed as their own. Just a few examples here. Where else except through Autobiography could we get Pat Conroy's account of how his black students at Beaufort, South Carolina High School all but attacked him in expressing their grief and anger over the news of Martin Luther King's assassination in April 1968? Or of Diane McWhorter's discovery that her father had been a Klansman in Birmingham, who may well have been involved in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963 that killed 4 young girls attending Sunday school. Or of Morris Dees, who tells of his attempt, only 1 week after that, to lead a prayer for the souls of those little girls in his home church in Montgomery, Alabama, white church, Baptist church, which led to a massive walkout by most of that congregation. Then there are descriptions by Jimmy Carter, by Maya Angelou, by Russell Baker, of local African-American celebrations at the radio broadcast of Joe Lewis's 1930s victories over white opponents as they witnessed them in Plains, Georgia, Stamps, Arkansas, and Baltimore, respectively. Ann Moody, John Lewis, Virginia Spencer, Willie Morris, and others have recounted how traumatized they were as adolescents to the news of a 14-year-old brutal lynching of 14-year-old Emmett Till in Mississippi in 1955. And yet no two of their responses are remotely alike. This is something where Lillian Smith is also, she was much older at the time, hardly an adolescent in 1955. And in some ways, I think she had perhaps the most unique response to that crime, at least that I know of. Where else could we see 7th grader Charles March on the first day of the 1970 school year in Laurel, Mississippi, as his junior high school integrated for the first time, wearing his most fully padded winter coat to guard against the attacks he anticipated from his new black classmates, and the reasons he found he didn't have to bundle up again on the second day? Or see sharecropper Maybertha Carter collapse on her bed and pray every day for several weeks as she sent several of her children off on a school bus as the only black students to enroll in the white schools of Sunflower County, Mississippi in 1965, and only come to life again when she counted all 7 as they got off that bus at the end of the day. As she related, and Connie Curry sitting right here in the front in that terrific book, Silver Rights, her classic account of the Carter family's ordeal. Or to hear Henry Louis Gates admit that there were aspects about segregation that he and his family missed when it ended, most notably the sense of security and camaraderie and even cuisine that the Jim Crow railroad cars offered, where they freely ate the sumptuous picnics they brought, played cards, sang, and socialized, all of which was lost when they gained the privilege of sharing that space with white passengers. Or to read Walter White's harrowing account of being caught up in downtown Atlanta at age 13 with his postman father as the infamous 1906 race riot broke out, and of their preparations to defend their home as the white mob moved into their neighborhood the following day. Or Catherine Dupree Lumpkin's admission of ambivalent feelings, including sheer exhilaration upon first seeing The Birth of a Nation while a student at Brenau College in Gainesville. Or the intrepid Delaney sisters, Sadie and Bessie, who at over 100 years in age recall their own participation in NAACP protests over that same film's re-release in New York City in the 1930s. Or to walk with Charlene Hunter Galt through the Arch at the University of Georgia on that January day in 1961 and follow with her the highs and lows of her first few days and those of Hamilton Holmes as they became the first African Americans to attend the state's flagship university. Or hear Ralph McGill admit that the 2 most effective, though decidedly unofficial mentors he knew during his first freshman year at Vanderbilt in the late 1940s were black men, one the janitor in his dormitory, and the other a part of a road crew with whom McGill worked as a summer job in Chattanooga. Or Rick Bragg's revelation in covering the Susan Smith story in South Carolina that his mother realized well before he, the journalist, did that no mother would abandon her 2 small children to a black man ordering her out of her car, as Smith claimed before the truth ultimately came out that she'd killed him herself, and all for a chance to move up a bit in the social strata of a sleepy mill town. Or to see the impact of Katrina brought home through Natasha Threthway's beautifully rendered account of her Gulfport-based brother and grandmother and the very different trials and tribulations it afflicted on each of them, published by UGA Press. Each of these episodes makes for eminently teachable moments, both individually and collectively, and they never fail to engage students and generate lively classroom discussions about race, class, kinship, place, justice, and injustice. As a genre, memoir and autobiography alone can render so much of our shared history as Southerners in such personal, intimate, and ultimately profound ways. I'll let Lillian Smith have the last word here in response to critics who suggested that she was too passionate in her analysis of Southern society. She wrote to her publisher regarding the revised edition of Killers of the Dream in 1961. Too much feeling, she wrote? Perhaps. I could strip off a little of the pain, rub out a few words, but no, let's leave it, for this may be the most real part of the book. There is indeed the most real part of many of these narratives, in large part because they convey so fully what Richard Wright once called his crossed-up feelings, his psychic pain, or what Fred Hobson has so aptly termed the Southern rage to explain. It is the emotional resonance, the psychological subtext, and again the sheer humanity that pervades these self-told narratives that allows for levels of empathy, sympathy, and understanding on the part of students in ways that no textbook or scholarly monograph can duplicate. I always hope that through their exposure to a wide range of these works, students will come to see and appreciate the South and its past in far richer and more compelling ways. It is what I also hope that readers will take from this book as well. Thank you.